The summer sun of 1942 burned over the endless Russian plains as the German war machine thundered eastward. Dust clouds rising behind thousands of tanks and trucks, engines roaring like a mechanical storm. Soldiers convinced victory was certain, their eyes fixed on one name that echoed across the steppe: Stalingrad, the city of Stalin himself. The key to the Volga, the heart of Soviet pride. Hitler's generals called it a strategic necessity, but for Hitler it was personal. He wanted to erase Stalin's name from the map. In Berlin, the radio declared the coming fall of Stalingrad inevitable, while in Moscow Stalin clenched his fists and ordered that no one take a single step back. The German Sixth Army under General Paulus advanced with terrifying speed, supported by the Luftwaffe, whose bombers screamed across the sky and unleashed infernos that turned whole districts to ash. On August 23rd, the first massive air raid hit the city, and in a single day Stalingrad burned like the gates of hell. Thousands of civilians buried under collapsing buildings, the Volga River reflecting red from the flames. Smoke blotted out the sun. Factories melted, trams burned on their rails, and children ran through streets that no longer existed. The German soldiers looked at the destruction and believed the battle was over, but they were wrong. Among the ruins, Soviet soldiers, factory workers and civilians dug in like ghosts of the earth, armed with rifles, pistols, and sheer rage. Every block became a fortress, every wall a line of defense, every cellar a command post. General Vasily Chukov, commander of the 62nd Army, took charge of the defense, promising Stalin he would hold the city or die in it. His men were starving, surrounded, and constantly under bombardment, yet they refused to yield. Soviet reinforcements crossed the Volga at night in small boats, under heavy fire from German artillery. Many never reached the shore, their bodies sinking into the cold black water, but still the flow of men never stopped. The Germans pushed street by street, fighting for single buildings, single rooms, single staircases. It became known as the Rattenkrieg, the Rat War, because men fought like rats in the rubble, hiding, crawling, ambushing. In the shattered factories of Red October and Barracuda, workers still operated lathes and machines beside corpses, manufacturing bullets and shells even as bombs fell through the roofs. Sergeant Yakov Pavlov and his squad fortified a 4-story apartment building that came to be known as Pavlov's house, holding it for 58 days against tanks, artillery, and endless infantry assaults. When asked what the battle felt like, a soldier said, "It's not war anymore, it's survival." The Germans, trained for open-field blitzkrieg, were trapped in a nightmare city where snipers ruled and machine gun fire echoed through broken windows. The Soviet marksmen hunted from shadows, and one of them, Vasily Zaitsev, became a legend, killing hundreds with patience and precision, his duel with the German sniper Major King turning into myth. By September, most of Stalingrad lay in ruins. Yet the Soviet flag still flew over the tractor factory and the riverbank. Hitler demanded daily updates, furious that Paulus had not finished the job. He ordered him to take the city no matter the cost, but the cost was rising beyond measure. German troops slept in basements filled with corpses, food supplies dwindled, winter approached, and still the Soviet defense hardened. The city's ruins became both grave and shield, swallowing tanks and swallowing hope. As October arrived, snow began to fall over the burned city, landing on twisted iron and frozen bodies. The Germans controlled almost 90% of Stalingrad but could not cross the Volga. Stalin spies whispered that the Soviet high command was planning something massive, but the Germans ignored the signs. To the north and south of the city, Soviet armies gathered silently in the steppe, thousands of tanks and men hidden by fog and snow. The plan was called Operation Uranus, and its goal was not to take Stalingrad but to encircle the rokellas in the city itself. Chukov told his exhausted soldiers to hold on a little longer, just until the counterattack began. He knew they were fighting inside a trap being built for the enemy. The soldiers of the 62nd Army lived in darkness, lighting candles in basements, writing letters that would never reach home, whispering to themselves that the city would rise again. Every hour was a lifetime, every heartbeat was resistance. The Germans, believing victory was only days away, celebrated with what little food remained, unaware that far beyond the city's smoking skyline, Soviet armor was lining up for the strike that would change everything. The night before the assault, the wind howled over the steppe, carrying with it the faint sound of engines and clanking treads. Soviet gunners adjusted their sights, waiting for the signal. Chukov looked across the Volga, the river now frozen in places, and thought of the men who had died to hold a single ruined street. At dawn on November 19, 1942, the silence broke. The sky erupted in fire as thousands of artillery pieces opened up simultaneously, the ground shaking like an earthquake. Soviet tanks surged forward through the snow, infantry following behind, shouting "Ira!" The German flanks, held by Romanian and Italian troops, collapsed under the storm. Within days, the trap closed, and Paulus's Sixth Army, over 300,000 men, found itself surrounded. In the city, German soldiers looked to the west for rescue that would never come. The hunters had become the hunted, and the hell of Stalingrad was about to reach its second act. Snow fell thick over the ruins of Stalingrad, covering the dead like a shroud, softening the screams that had echoed for months in the frozen Volga glittered under a gray sky as the wind carried the smell of smoke and decay across the steppe. The once mighty German Sixth Army was now trapped inside a killing ground, encircled by the Red Army in what would become one of the most complete and devastating sieges in modern history. Operation Uranus had closed its iron jaws. The Soviet pincers met at the town of Kalik, cutting off Paulus and his men from the outside world. Within the ring were over 300,000 soldiers, thousands of vehicles, hundreds of tanks, all trapped with dwindling ammunition and food. The German soldiers stared at maps by candlelight, tracing lines that no longer existed, waiting for rescue from the west. But Hitler's orders came through clear and cruel. You will hold your positions. You will not attempt to break out. Stalingrad must not be abandoned. In his mind, retreat meant weakness, and weakness was death. Paulus obeyed, torn between duty and doom, and thus the Sixth Army began to die slowly in the snow. Inside the city, German soldiers took shelter in basements once filled with Soviet families, now filled with ice and bodies. Food ran out. Horses were eaten, dogs vanished, even wallpaper was scraped for its flour paste. Frostbite blackened fingers, and medicine was gone. Soviet artillery never stopped, night or day, constant thunder that shook walls and nerves alike. Air supply was impossible. The Luftwaffe promised to deliver 300 tons of supplies daily, but rarely reached 100. Planes were shot down, and those that landed returned empty or frozen solid. Men tore pages from Bibles and burned them for warmth. The once glorious Wehrmacht was now a starving, broken army surrounded by an ocean of steel. Soviet loudspeakers echoed through the ruins, offering surrender and life. But Hitler's voice came louder in every officer's ear: fight to the last bullet. And they did. Meanwhile, outside the city, Marshal Zhukov launched Operation Little Saturn to widen the encirclement and crush the German relief effort. The Soviet armies advanced through the blizzards like an unstoppable tide. General Monstein tried to break through with Operation Winter Storm, driving from Kotelnikovo with fresh panzer divisions, and for a moment, hope flickered in the encircled troops. Paulus's officers begged him to disobey Hitler and attempt a breakout, but he refused. The relief force reached within 50 kilometers of the trapped army, then was forced back by relentless Soviet counterattacks. The hope died as quickly as it had come, replaced by silence and despair. Inside the pocket, disease spread faster than bullets, and letters home turned from confidence to hopelessness. "We are the forgotten army," one soldier wrote, frozen between life and death. As December bled into January, Soviet troops tightened the noose, advancing street by street through the same ruins they had once defended. The Red Army was now the hunter, and every building that had once been a fortress for the Germans became their tomb. The famous tractor factory changed hands 3 times before the final assault, its machines buried under snow and metal. Soviet Katyusha rockets screamed overhead, their sound known as Stalin's organs, raining destruction that made the night glow red. Chukov's men advanced under the cover of smoke, flamethrowers lighting corridors where the Germans hid, grenades echoing through hollow floors. The Germans no longer fought for victory, they fought for time, for warmth, for a chance to live one more hour. By mid-January 1943, Soviet forces had split the German pocket into two. Paulus's headquarters, once a grand department store in the city center, was now a bunker filled with smoke and resignation. Outside, the temperature dropped below -30 degrees Celsius, and snow drifted over the dead so deep they formed new hills. Hitler, in his distant bunker, promoted Paulus to field marshal, hoping to force him into suicide, since no German field marshal had ever been captured alive. But Paulus refused to die for pride. He said quietly, "I have no intention of shooting myself for that Bohemian corporal." On January 31st, Soviet troops stormed his command post. The once mighty commander of the Sixth Army surrendered, his officers standing silently as Red Army soldiers burst through the doors. 2 days later, the northern pocket surrendered as well. The battle was over. Of the 300,000 German soldiers who had entered Stalingrad, fewer than 90,000 were taken prisoner. The rest lay dead in the snow or buried beneath the ruins. Only about 5,000 would ever return home after the war. Soviet losses were catastrophic, over 1 million soldiers and civilians dead or wounded, but they had won the greatest defensive victory in history. The city that bore Stalin's name was reduced to dust, yet it stood unconquered. When the guns finally fell silent, Stalingrad was a wasteland of steel and bones. But for the Soviet Union, it was rebirth. The tide of war had turned. Across the world, headlines shouted the same word, Stalingrad, a word that now meant not just a place, but endurance itself. For the Germans, it marked the beginning of the end. For the Soviets, it was the spark that would lead them all the way to Berlin. In the months that followed, the Volga thawed, the snow melted into rivers that carried away the blood of thousands, and flowers began to bloom among the wreckage. Survivors walked among skeletons of tanks, shattered statues, and the broken walls of their homes. They said the city was dead, but from its ashes rose a legend. Stalingrad had become more than a battle. It was a testament to human will, to the limits of suffering and the strength of hope. The war still raged, but the momentum had shifted forever. Hitler's armies would never recover from the loss. The echoes of that winter still linger today, in every ruined brick preserved, in every whispered memory of those who endured it. Stalingrad was hell on earth, and in that hell, humanity proved it could endure anything.